So today we are making some beautiful cassava flour tortillas and ultimately some black bean and pepita tacos. Really great plant-based option. I'm really excited to show you the filling. And first, we're going to go ahead and make the tortillas. So with our tortillas, I'll show you my mise en place, meaning everything in its place. So this is one of the things that we do, we teach as chefs. It's really important to be organized in the kitchen. So I have my cassava flour, which is a really great grain-free flour. So it's also known as tapioca, this from the same plant. We're also going to use just a little bit of tapioca starch, which is the finer version or the more refined version of cassava. And then we have some really beautiful spices that we're going to add in here just to amp up the flavor of the base of our tacos. So I have some garlic powder, a little bit of turmeric, which can help with inflammation. I have some beautiful smoked paprika, again for flavor and a little color. We have cumin, a little bit of pink Himalayan sea salt, and then finally, we're going to add just a touch of fat, either in the form of avocado oil, which I'm using today, or an olive oil. Okay, so nice healthy fats that we're adding for a little bit of pliability and bend in our tacos. The final ingredient that we're going to add is hot water. So you can see here, I've got my electric kettle. I'm going to go ahead and fill this up most of the way with my hot water because we really want that water to have the chance to absorb into this cassava flour. So what we're going to do first, now that we have our hot water kind of sitting, resting, ready to go, we're going to mix in all of our dry ingredients. So we have our cassava flour, our tapioca starch, we have our salt, that smoked paprika, garlic, turmeric, cumin, and we're going to just give this a nice little whisk. We want to incorporate all of our dry ingredients really cohesively so that they don't clump up as soon as we add in our liquid ingredients. Mm. Next, we're going to go ahead and drizzle in that good fat from our oil. And then we're going to start incorporating the water. One of the things that's really important is that we don't want to add the water all at once, just because sometimes, your flour can actually pick up ambient humidity in the air. So we can always add more. We can't really take it away. So we're going to start with a little less than what the recipe calls for. Okay, maybe start with about 2/3 of the water. And then we're going to just stir this up. And they definitely recommend stirring this up to start just with a nice spoon while you can get kind of in all of those nooks and crannies, get all of the flour that's kind of sticking on the bottom. And then once you start incorporating that flour, we can switch over to our hands. I will say that the hands are one of the best tools in the kitchen, right? It's really important to make sure that your hands are clean, obviously, but it's really great to be able to feel the textures of the food that you're cooking. Okay? So you can see that it's pretty crumbly, this mixture that I have right now. It's not fully moistened, which is what I'm really looking for. So I'm going to go ahead now and add in a little bit more of that water. Mm. We'll hold back just a little bit, mix a little bit more, and you can see the colors of all of those spices starting to really come out with that moistening. And the dough itself is coming together as well too. It's not crumbling, it's kind of holding together as a nice pasty consistency. And one of the things that we can do for testing it out to make sure that it's ready to be turned into a tortilla is to make sure that we have that really nice moisture in there. And a really easy way to do this is just taking a little bit of the dough, a little pinch of it, rolling it up in your hands, okay, and then pressing it down. So you can see here all around the edges, I have cracks. It's not holding together, it's kind of falling apart. So that means that I need to still add a touch more water, okay? So we'll go ahead, add in just a little bit more. Mix that in, incorporating all of that good moisture. Okay. And I can feel now that the dough itself is starting to come together. It's a little bit softer, it's a little more pliable. So we're definitely going in the right direction. So let's do that little test again. We'll roll up in a little ball, okay, and then press down. And so you can see now, instead of having all of those big chunks and cracks around the edges, we may have just a little bit, but overall we have a much smoother circumference, that sort of outer edge. So this is a perfect spot for us now to kind of make sure that we have our tortilla dough ball kind of put down together, holding all of that moisture in. And then we're going to let this rest for about 10 minutes or so, covered with a damp towel. The reason that we use the damp towel is we don't want to lose any of that good moisture that we just worked so hard to get in there. So we want to cover it up with something that can really retain that moisture, whether that's a damp towel or some beeswax wrap or plastic wrap. All right, so we're going to go ahead and just going to cover up and clean up my station. And then we're going to start working on our filling. So for this filling, like I said before, it's a great plant-based filling. We're using pumpkin seeds, pepitas, which are the green ones, the cute little green ones, that have actually been soaked for about an hour in warm water. And I'll show you all of my mise en place here. There are a lot of ingredients. We're always talking about eating the rainbow, right? And what's really great about tacos in general is that they're such a versatile food. You can add whatever kind of fillings you want in, whatever toppings, whatever flavors you're really going for. So today I'm really focusing on lots of fresh vegetables, some really beautiful spices, and then again, the sort of meat of my taco is going to be these black beans, cooked black beans, and then these soaked and pulsed up pumpkin seeds. Okay. So for our cooking, we're going to go ahead and scoot over to our burner. We want to start this on a good sort of medium high heat. Okay, so if we have our burner, we're going to turn it down just a little bit so that we have a nice sort of even medium high heat. And we're allowing that pan to heat up really nicely. So we get a beautiful heat that will immediately sort of open up the flavors in our alliums, meaning our onions and our garlic, and also in our spices. Okay. So for this, I'm going to be using, again, a nice high temperature oil. I love avocado oil. It's got a very high smoke point, great for grilling, for sauteing. So I'm going to use just about a tablespoon of avocado oil. Okay. And we're going to start by cooking off our diced onions. We just want to soften these a little bit so that we get a little of that natural sweetness coming out of them. Okay. Moving it around in the oil just so we're not fully trying to get color on them. We're not trying to caramelize them because we'd be here for about an hour if we tried to caramelize them. But we are trying to soften them to get that beautiful sweetness and take away just a little bit of the sharpness that's naturally in an onion. I love using red onions for this especially because I think the color is really beautiful on the plate. But one of the other things that's great about red onions is that they're naturally a little bit sweeter. And they're also really high in some really wonderful antioxidants. That sort of pinkish red color, it's actually really high in anthocyanins. So it's really great for you. Also, onions themselves are very high in a compound called quercetin, which is really good for heart health. It's really good just in general for overall health and well-being. All right, so we're just going to give this a good stir. You can see that we're starting to soften a little bit around the edges. And once that happens, we're going to add in our garlic. Now, I know the recipe says 2 cloves of garlic. I didn't even listen to my own recipe. I love garlic, so I usually put in about 2 or 3 times the amount. So I'm putting in probably about 3 or 4 cloves, but I think you should measure garlic with your heart, so you do whatever feels right for you. All right, so we're just going to sort of get that beautiful aroma of our onions and our garlic. And I have to say, whenever you walk into a house where onions have been cooked, it's like, oh yeah, I want to stay here for dinner, right? Beautiful. All right. So then next, what we're going to do is bloom our spices. So that's going to bring out the natural flavor. And blooming is basically just toasting. So I've got, again, some smoked paprika. I've got a little onion powder, garlic powder, cumin, chili powder, and then a little bit of the Mexican style oregano. All right, we're gonna stir this up. Again, just kind of lightly toasting in the oil, bringing about all of those beautiful flavors. Mm. And then we're gonna start adding in some of our other ingredients. Okay, so we have our black beans, again, sort of the high fiber, good source of plant-based protein. Okay. We're gonna add in are pumpkin seeds. And I wanted to stop for a second just to show this is what the soaked pumpkin seeds look like after pulsing in a food processor or chopping up finely. And they're going to add really beautiful texture and also some really wonderful minerals and nutrients to make our meal a little more satisfying and also a little bit more nutrient dense. We're going to just mix that up. And then the last few things that we're going to add here are our diced jalapeno. And I definitely recommend tasting this before you dump them all in. Every jalapeno is a little different, right? Some are really spicy, some are a little less spicy. So give a little nibble and then put in however many you think you want. I love spice in this house, so I'm going to probably just go full beans for it. Okay. We're also going to put in just some tomatoes. And for these, I actually kept the seeds in and a lot of the natural liquid because that's going to help deglaze our pan and pick up all of that beautiful toasted flavor from our spices. All right. Wonderful. And what we're really aiming for here is not necessarily a specific temperature, but just warming everything through. We don't have a protein, so we're not worried about, bacteria. We're not worried about getting it to a specific temperature. We're just making sure that all of those flavors are nice and cohesive and the filling is warmed through for our tacos. Okay. Finally, we're going to add in just a little squeeze of lime juice. So high in vitamin C, really good for you. Also, a really great way to be able to digest non-heme or plant-based iron sources. So we have iron from our pumpkin seeds, also beautiful zinc from our pumpkin seeds. But that little bit of lime juice is actually going to help us digest and use that iron a little bit more efficiently in our bodies. All right, beautiful. And then the last thing that we have to do is taste it and season to taste. I'll put it on my face for this part so you can see me in real time. So really lovely flavors. We have some nice freshness from our tomatoes. The little bite from the jalapeno, absolutely lovely. But it definitely needs something to kind of bring it all together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some salt. Now, salt is what we almost always consider seasoning as a chef. We're not necessarily talking about other spices, other ingredients, but salt itself is there to really help tie all those flavors together, brighten them, and bring them up to sort of that singing point that makes your taste buds sing and soar. So a little pinch of salt. We can add in just a touch of black pepper for additional heat. And then let's give it another taste. All right. Beautiful. So just with that little pinch of salt, I can really taste a lot more of those spices. It's kind of bringing them to the forefront. So those flavors are really filling out and rounding out in my mouth, but we're still not quite there. So I'm going to give one more pinch of salt, give it a good stir, and then I think we'll be there. But you can see just how beautiful and meaty this texture is. Without any sort of, animal-based protein, we have a beautiful, cohesive, and meaty filling that is super high in nutrition. We've got fiber, we have wonderful nutrients and minerals in here, and also just tons of flavor. All right, so one last taste. All right, there we are. So that little bit of salt, that last little pinch is just brightening everything up. My taste buds are happy. I'm actually starting to drool, which is a great thing, getting all those digestive juices flowing. So we're going to set this off to the side now and let it rest, kind of stay warm while we start working on some of the garnishing for our tacos, and then also working a little bit on the tortillas themselves. So for our garnishes, I'm using a lot of the same ingredients that I used in the filling itself. You'll see the diced tomatoes, you'll see some sliced red onion, a little fresh. And then I'm also going to add in a few other items as well. We've got our fresh jalapenos again for a little extra kick, pumpkin seeds for some crunch because we're already using those in the filling too. So adding this as a nice little crunchy bit, a little functional garnish. And then a little squeeze of fresh lime juice. I love that in a taco. It just brightens everything up in addition to also bringing out that iron, the ability for us to digest and absorb iron more effectively. And I'm also going to put in some avocado because I love avocado. That creaminess, those healthy, good fats, so wonderful in a taco. And finally, some cilantro. So for our avocado, one of the best ways to cut an avocado safely, right? We've been seeing all these horror stories in social media posts of people cutting their hands on avocados because a lot of people think that you have to hold it in your palm to be able to cut it effectively. But one of the things that we can do is actually use our cutting board and the stability of our knife to help us get a really good cut on this without our hands getting in the way. So what we're going to do is we're going to start slicing from the top of our avocado and then turning the avocado around while keeping it on the cutting board. You can also see that my guide hand, that's what we call the hand that's not holding the knife, is nice and curled. My fingers are protected, my fingertips are curled under, so I have no chance of cutting them. Okay? What I'm going to do now, so I have this nice cut, a lateral cut kind of around the equator of the avocado. I'm going to turn it a quarter of a turn and do the same thing. So I'm going to go ahead, start my slice. Once I get to that pit, then I'm just going to start rotating the avocado around just until I get back to my line. And then what's great is you can twist, break your avocado apart into quarters, and very easily remove the pit from it without having to smack the knife in. You can just use your hands to pop it out. And we have 4 beautiful quarters of avocado. And you can do slices, you can do a dice, however you like to eat your avocado in a taco or on toast. But for me, I like to do a nice little dice so I get a little bit in every bite. So I'm just going to use the tip of my knife, pinching on the outer edges of my avocado. So again, my hand is not ever in danger of getting cut. And we're just cutting all the way to the skin, not through. And again, cutting across those cuts that I just made to make a nice even dice that I can very easily just scoop out with a spoon. And see, they kind of pop out on their own. Mm. All right, the rest of these are going to be reserved for other uses. But the other trick that I wanted to show you is with our knives, with our limes. So with limes, we want to be able to squeeze them really easily without getting any of that juice in our eyes, right? So one of the things that you can do is right at the center point of the line. So where the top and the bottom kind of dimple out, there is this membrane that runs through the sort of length and center of the lime. If we cut just to the side of that, then we can actually kind of remove that so that we have an easier time squeezing. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and find sort of that center point. I'm going to position my knife just to the side of it, cut down, and you can see that I've left it behind here. So that's that sort of tough membrane that makes it a lot harder to squeeze. And so then we can go ahead from here, cut off the end because we don't want to include anything that you couldn't theoretically eat. Nobody wants to munch on the sort of stem of the lime. And then we can cut this into smaller pieces, either quarters or eighths. But because we got rid of that membrane, they're going to be much easier to squeeze onto our taco now, or to put in a cocktail or a mocktail, whatever you want to use your lime for. All right. And then the last garnish that I want to prepare is just some nice cilantro leaves. I am probably not going to use a ton because I have to admit I'm of the population that thinks cilantro tastes like soap if there's too much of it, unfortunately. But a little bit of greenery, a little bit of that beautiful herbaceousness, and cilantro is also just so good for you. It's one of those herbs that it's high in nutrients, it's high in beautiful antioxidants, and also has been linked to help flush out toxicity in our bodies. So it can be a really good healing herb to include into your foods. Okay. So we'll just pick off a couple nice little leaves, set those off to the side on our garnish tray. All right. And now it's time to make some tortillas. So with our tortilla dough, It's been resting for about 10 minutes, basically the time that we've been making the filling. And that just allows all of that liquid, all of that water to absorb into our dough and make sure that everything is moistened really effectively. So now what we're going to do is pinch it off into some nice little sort of round balls that we're going to form into our hand. And it's about 2 tablespoons or so per tortilla. Okay. A lot of that is going to depend on what size of tortilla you want. If you want sort of a street taco size, that's going to be about 4 inches in diameter. If you want a slightly larger taco, that's going to be closer to 6. But generally speaking, about 2 tablespoons of our dough is going to be a good portion for getting that nice sort of handheld taco size. Okay. So we'll go ahead and just roll all of these up. And this batch makes quite a few, actually. You can get anywhere from about 10 to 12 tacos out of this recipe. But for the sake of time, we're going to just focus on 6. I will make the others later. As these are resting, as I'm waiting, I'm going to cover them again with that same damp towel because we want to make sure that these don't dry out, that we don't lose, again, any of that moisture that we've been working so hard to keep. All right. The next thing we're going to do is preheat our pan. So for this, traditionally you would use what's called a comal, which is a beautiful sort of cast iron flat griddle, but a cast iron skillet works beautifully. So I'm going to heat up my cast iron skillet, and I've already sort of cheated a little bit. I started preheating it on my other stove. But I want to heat this up at a nice medium-high heat again, because I'm trying to get a lot of that retained heat so that I can get a beautiful color, maybe a little bit of char, and cook my tortillas all the way through pretty efficiently and quickly. So we're going to let that heat up, get it to the point where it's almost smoking. And while that's happening, we're going to go ahead and press our tacos. So I have this beautiful tortilla press. It's a really nice heavy duty cast iron one. This is a great investment. If you plan on making tortillas for yourself all the time, I highly recommend getting a press. If you don't have one, you can absolutely do this though with just a rolling pin. Works really well. But the press can get you a very nice and even taco, and you can mass produce them quite quickly. So we're going to go ahead and take a couple pieces of parchment because the cassava flour is naturally a little bit stickier than a corn masa, a corn tortilla. We're going to put one on the bottom, one on the top, okay? Kind of flatten that ball of dough. Then we're going to go ahead and press down all the way on one side. Then rotate the the tortilla about 180 degrees and press it again so that we get a really nice even thickness. Okay, so you can see here we have a beautiful thin taco. Put it up on my face so you can see just that really lovely, it's about the thickness of I'd say maybe a quarter, but that's going to cook beautifully, very evenly. So I'm going to go ahead and just press a couple more of them because we can't just have one taco, we have to have a few of them. All right, so again, flatten it down, press, press again. And there you go. You can see again, really nice and even. You can also see all of those really beautiful spices. So we have our smoked paprika, our turmeric, which is giving a lovely color, flavor, and also some of those anti-inflammatory effects. All right, we'll do one more. So again, press, rotate 180 degrees, press again. And sometimes, this is great, sometimes it's going to sneak out one side. And it's okay. Not all tacos have to be perfectly round. It's still going to taste beautiful, no matter if it has a little bit missing on the edge or if it's perfectly circular. So we can put that off to the side, go over to our burner, which you can see it's starting to get a little smoky, which is great. We're getting some beautiful heat. One thing that I will recommend for the cassava flour specifically is just to put a tiny, tiny bit of oil in the pan. You don't need a lot, but just enough so that we can make sure that slightly stickier cassava flour doesn't stick to our pan. Okay. You can see we've got some nice heat, some nice smoking happening. And from here, what we're gonna do is just flip our tortilla over, keep it on the one side of parchment, smack it right onto the pan, and then the steam of that cooking process is going to allow me to peel off that parchment paper really effectively, even though the cassava flour is naturally a little bit stickier. All right, so we're gonna cook it just about 30 seconds to a minute, just until you can start seeing some of that dryness coming and cooking all the way through. You can see that the color is a lot paler around the edge. That's because we're cooking and drying out. And so once we get to the point where the center has also paled, we're gonna flip it. You can see a little bit of that charring from the nice hot cast iron. And then we're just gonna let it cook another 30 seconds to a minute on the opposite side. And sometimes if you're lucky, mine's doing it right now, you'll see it start to puff up a little bit. And that's a really good indication that we are fully cooked all the way through and that we're gonna have a tender and beautiful tortilla. All right, so we can go ahead and we're gonna pop this into a basket lined with a napkin because that's actually gonna help the tortilla steam naturally and become more flexible. All right, we'll go ahead and pop another tortilla. Again, just dropping it down, letting it cook for a second so that that steam helps us release from the parchment paper. Peel back and let that cook until it dries out a little bit. You can see it a little bit on the edges, starting to kind of creep into the center more and more. And once we get to the point where that dryness, that sort of change in color has kind of become across the entire tortilla, then we can go ahead and flip it. So you can get under there with a spatula. From working in the restaurants for so long, my hands, we call them asbestos fingers. I can just flip it right in the pan, but using tongs, using a spatula, they're absolutely wonderful tools. Let that cook for another 30 seconds or so. And we can go ahead, pop it in to our little steaming basket and cook our last one. One thing I will say, the cassava flour is a really wonderful gluten-free and grain-free alternative. So traditional masa, which is made out of corn, is a beautiful ingredient to use. It makes delicious tacos. Also, again, gluten-free naturally, which is great. But if you're cooking for somebody who is following a specific diet where they can't have grain, cassava can be a really wonderful option. And it acts really similarly to masa in the way it absorbs liquid, also in its pliability, so its ability to fold into a really nice taco. All right, we'll go ahead and flip this last one, and then it is time to plate some tacos. All right. So just getting some of my garnishes ready. We'll go ahead and pop our last taco into the little steaming basket. We'll grab all of our garnishes. So our functional garnishes, they're going to add brightness and flavor and color to our beautiful tacos. Okay. All right. Last little bit of cilantro. And then finally, a plate. So we'll do a nice little single serve taco. We'll start with one. And you can see after steaming, this is actually the last one that I just did, how much more flexible and pliable it is just with sitting in that little basket with the towel for that length of time. Okay. All right, we're gonna go ahead and put in some of our beautiful filling, our pumpkin seeds and black beans. Okay. And then we're going to garnish to our heart's content. So I'm going to start with just a little bit of avocado, get some nice little creaminess in every bite there. We'll put in some fresh tomatoes, again, because we have the tomatoes in the filling itself. And put in a little bit of jalapeno just for a little extra heat. Some fresh red onion. And I will say, for my red onions, I'm not a big fan of straight raw onions. So what I'll actually do for these to mellow them out a little is to cut them and then soak them in ice water for about 10 to 15 minutes. That takes away a little bit of the sharpness, but still retains that beautiful crisp and that really nice sweetness. Okay, you can put in a couple of pieces of cilantro, some of our pumpkin seeds for a little extra crunch. And then finally finish with a little squeeze of lime juice and serve it with a couple more. And there you have your black bean and pepita tacos with some beautiful fresh vegetables. Again, eating the rainbow in every bite. That's one of the things that we're always talking about, Bauman, eating the rainbow, getting as many different colored vegetables as you can in your diet. And like, what better way to do that in a taco, right?